5w-30, and then we have a synthetic blend. The 5w-30 is an excellent oil. That oil has been used in virtually all of these diesels, including over-the-road truck diesels that use that stuff. Everybody gets better fuel economy with it. That's one of the reasons it's used. It's a very tough oil. You don't have to worry about it being a 30 weight as far as temperature. If the engine shows good compression and runs well on it, it doesn't care how hot it gets, because it is really manufactured to hold its viscosity through all of the temperature ranges you'd expect a diesel to be in. Now, it's high in the 30 weight range. It's not low in the 30 weight range. So it's not like we're selling you a super grade 20 and calling it a 30 weight. This is just below the 40 weight level is what it is. So it's a thick 30, and it works very well. And most, believe it or not, you ever wonder why would a diesel engine, just all these diesel engines always call for 40 weight oil? What's the story on that? Okay? Why do diesel engines call for 40 weight oil?
That's the way it is.
Yeah. And I'll tell you how it got started and why it is. When diesels back years ago, everybody's familiar with them, we always were very concerned about diesel in the oil. Because all of the old-fashioned injectors, they weren't like these new things, they were rail injectors and stuff, and they always leaked. I mean, they just leaked, and they were designed. That's the way they work. So you had this, if you were below, you expected to run 2 to 3% diesel contamination in your oil, and if you got above 5%, you had to check your injectors and see what was wrong. Okay, and that was standard. So they figured out if you're going to run up to 5% diesel fuel in the oil, you got to start with a 40 weight oil, because all the clearances in the diesel engine are made for 30 weight oil. So you start with a 40 weight oil, so that if you get fuel contamination, you'll still have a 30. If you started with a 30 and you got that fuel contamination, you'd be down in the 20s, and that ain't going to work. So that was their initial design consideration, was they could not fix the injectors. The injectors were, they figured in those days it was too expensive to make injectors that didn't leak, so you just live with the leaking. Didn't matter. Diesel was cheap. Diesels ran over the road, just clunkety, 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 there you go down the road, and they were excellent pulling machines, and they worked fine, but they did not care if they leaked. And in the bigger diesels, that got even more wild. When I was in the Navy and they had these big Morris Fairbanks opposed piston diesels that did, well, let's see, they were 4,000 kilowatt generators on them, so they had to be somewhere 5,000 horsepower or something like that. But anyway, they were turbocharged, and they were built way back. In fact, if you ever were down at Kissimmee and you went into their old power plant and looked, that's the exact same diesels that were on these two tenders. It's the exact same. Looks like the whole engine room sitting there. But they were built at a time that was fine. Then the Navy decided a few years later that they were going to tighten up on all this loose engineering, so they came out and said, you got to get all these diesel injector leaks fixed and all this kind of stuff. And it turned out that they finally had to write this big waiver from NAVSEA for these two ships. I was on both these ships at one time or the other, because their diesels couldn't be fixed. Their whole fuel system was designed, the leakage was part of its lubrication for the moving parts. If you didn't let it leak, it wouldn't be lubricated and it would wear out the injectors. So this went round and round. Crazy stuff, because they had all these sophisticated engineers saying, well, that's not right. And I remember the captain of the ship said, I really can't tell you what's right or what's wrong. You need to call Fairbanks Morris and ask them why they built this piece of, I don't know, he used an expletive, and so, but that's the story on diesels. They started out expecting them to leak, so they started with a thicker oil. Believe it or not, it's the same thing for marine engine oils. When you look at all these 40 weight oils for marine engine oil, same thing. They expected that they would have condensation and other contamination that would thin the oil in that environment. You needed to start with thicker oil to make sure you stayed it enough. So don't worry about this 5w-30. Now, think about this for a minute. You guys, they say, okay, if you drive this Peterbilt trailer with a Cummins engine in it in Saskatchewan, you can use 5w-30. But if you use that same truck in Arizona, you got to put 1540 in it, right? Now here's the question you got to ask yourself. Does the cooling system and the thermostat really work on this engine or not? Because if I take those flap things, they put on them up in Saskatchewan and put them across the front so there's no air coming, and I got a thermostat, and the thermostat finally opens, I look at the temperature, it says the truck's running at 185 degrees, right? And I'm running 5w-30 in it, and I'm a happy camper. Now I go down to Arizona, and if I've got good airflow and the cooling system's big like it should be, and I look and it's 185 degrees, shouldn't it run on the same 30-weight oil at 185 degrees in Arizona as it does in Canada? You see, they're going by the old thing in that I've got petroleum oil which isn't going to hold its viscosity no matter what temperature I'm running at. Yes?
The Series 3000, is that what would be recommended for like 7.3 Fords prior to 2007
Yeah.
because of the...
Yeah, I will. Go ahead. Yeah, the question is, if you had a 7.3 liter Ford, which is the original, well, it was actually the non-Power Stroke, and then they made a Power Stroke out of the 7.3. The 7.3.
Talking about the Power Stroke,
right?
The oil pressure injection.
Right, right. Now, in fact, in the 7.3 liter Power Stroke diesel, 1995 version, kind of around there is when they made them. That's the best oil. It has been proven over and over and over that 5w-30 actually, if you want to make a performance out of the truck, let me rephrase that. If you wanted to jack that truck up with a chip and put a lot of power in it, you go to the 5w-30 because it's actually, I know it's down in the microseconds, but it will actually fire those hydraulic injectors faster than the 1540. So once you go to jack that truck up to a higher power level, the 5w-30 is actually the preferable oil in that 7.3 because it operates the injectors better than the 1540. Now the 1540 runs fine in the truck. I'm talking about when you do the friend of ours, Bob Riley, the truck and turn it into a massive sled pulling machine, and that's all he ran in it was 5w-30 because it would make the injectors got quicker and could actually get more power out of the truck. Now the 1540 synthetic blend, yes.
So is that oil can run in the turbocharged good?
This one? And say that again, a turbocharged?
Get it going.
Yes. Now there's guys that run that. I have some commercial accounts that run nothing but that in over-the-road trucks. That's all they'll run. And the reason is because they see no less than a half, if not closer to a 1 mile per gallon difference in fuel economy running that oil.
The 5w-30?
Now you got to be careful. In some of the diesels that have a lot of miles on them, it'll just consume it because they've got too much clearance. They've worn some and they're just too much clearance. So if you put that 5w-30 in a big over-the-road truck and you realize you have to put an extra fill tube as you're going down the road, driving with one hand and filling with the other.
Oh, like the old Detroit.
Yeah, like old Detroit, just sucking it through. It's too thin. But other than that, if it doesn't consume it, it'll do a great job. Great job. The 1540 synthetic blend, it's there because they've sold tons of it for years and they won't get rid of it. They've had a market for that in the truck community up in the Midwest for years. And they're not going to stop making it as long as they keep selling it. It's a good blend of about 50-50 synthetic and petroleum. And so the guys out there that run it for about 15,000 miles effectively in over-the-road trucks, and they couldn't be happier with it.